This is part 3 of the series. George DelVio, November 22, 1995. The state sought the death penalty when George DelVio was found guilty in 1979 of murder, essay, deviant essay, and burglary. His victim was a 6-year-old boy. This, however, was not his first murder. The first took place during a 2-day criminal spree that DelVio and 2 young friends were on in early February 1965. They chose to rob and kill Fred Christensen, an elderly man they stumbled upon on the second day. While his comrades kicked the dying man to stop him from pleading for assistance, DelVio shot Mr. Christensen 9 times. $11 were found in Mr. Christensen's wallet. DelVio confessed to the murder after being taken into custody by the police. DelVio was just 16 years old at the time of Mr. Christensen's murder. He was about to be 17 years old on March 1st. DelVio was charged as an adult, entering a guilty plea, and received his sentence before turning 17. He was turned over to the Illinois Youth Commission and placed in a juvenile jail facility. DelVio was returned to court to receive an adult sentence once he turned 21. When deciding how to sentence the confessed murderer, the presiding judge had a lot of discretion. DelVio might have received a minimum sentence of 14 years or a maximum term of life in prison. The parties agreed that if DelVio had been punished after turning 17 in 1965, a court would have had precisely this amount of discretion. DelVio had a stellar record while he was a resident of the Adolescent Center, and the judge reportedly took that into account. DelVio was given a sentence of at least 14 years in an adult prison, as required by law. Only a few years after his sentencing, in April 1973, he was granted parole after being credited with time served and continuing to be a model prisoner. Sadly, DelVio's exemplary behavior stopped after he was released from prison. He struck once more in 1977. Tony Canzonieri, 6 years old, was his victim this time. DelVio reportedly planned to essay Tony's mother, Karen Canzonieri, when he broke into her apartment early one morning. Karen was known to DelVio. The previous evening, he had visited the residence and used Mary Jane with others. He found little Tony on the first level of the residence when he broke in the following morning. It seems that DelVio killed Tony because he did not want him to get in the way of his relationship with Karen. The youngster was nearly decapitated when he slashed his throat viciously, destroying his trachea, carotid artery, jugular vein, and vagus nerve. He also fractured his third and fourth vertebrae. After stuffing Tony's body into a crawl space, DelVio went upstairs to Karen's bedroom and essayed her. When he briefly left Karen alone, she managed to get away and called the police. DelVio was hiding on the roof when the police arrived. When he was first apprehended, he said, "I didn't kill nobody." On November 23, 1995, George DelVio passed away at Stateville Correctional Center, a jail located 60 miles southwest of Chicago, by lethal injection. After having a heart attack at the end of the previous month, DelVio had an angioplasty on November 3 to open a clogged artery. His attorneys argued that the medication he was taking impairs his judgment and renders him ineligible for execution, notwithstanding his jailer's declaration that he was fit. At 12:24 a.m., DelVio was carried into the execution chamber of the prison and given a death dose of 3 deadly chemicals. "God bless Rosie," DelVio remarked, referring to his ex-wife. He sighed and closed his eyes as the chemicals invaded his nervous system. In a lengthy and scathing statement prior to the execution, DelVio said he was ashamed of his home state and blasted the state of Illinois for wrongfully executing him. His final meal consisted of filet mignon with mushrooms, shellfish, a baked potato with sour cream, Brussels sprouts, corn on the cob, salad with Italian dressing, pistachio flavor ice cream, and 2 cannoli. Raymond Lee Stewart, September 18, 1996. He murdered 6 people during a week-long rampage in Rockford, Illinois, and Beloit, Wisconsin, in 1981. Born in 1952 in Burlington, North Carolina, Stewart grew up in a violent household. When he was just 14 years old, his father kicked him out of the house and told him never to return, and he regularly essayed and physically abused his 9 children. Stewart left school and worked at a number of jobs. He eventually relocated to Rockford, Illinois. He committed multiple robberies in 1973. After entering a guilty plea to 4 charges of armed robbery, he received a prison sentence ranging from 5 to 15 years. After serving 6 years, Stewart was released on parole after another robbery count was dropped for lack of evidence. Stewart drew his revolver on a landlord in December 1980 because the man refused to return a $50 security deposit. He found out a month later that his girlfriend had had her tubes tied without notifying him after giving birth to their daughter. As a result of both incidents, Stewart's anger grew. He said years later that he also desired retribution for his previous conviction for robbery. Stewart used a .38 caliber handgun to shoot and kill Willie Fred, a 54-year-old store owner who had seen one of Stewart's thefts in 1973, and his stock boy Albert Pearson, 20, in the afternoon of January 27, 1981, in Rockford's West Side. At a patrol station 2 miles away the following day, Stewart shot and killed Kevin Kaiser, an 18-year-old service station attendant. Stewart murdered 35-year-old service station attendant Kenny Faust in a 24-hour period. Richard Boak, 21, and Donald Raines, 26, were both found shot in the head inside a Radio Shack in a Beloit, Wisconsin mall, marking the end of Stewart's spree. After guiding the 2 guys to the rear of the shop, Stewart shot them many times. On February 21, 1981, Stewart was located and taken into custody in Greensboro, North Carolina, after authorities linked him to the killings. On September 18, 1996, Stewart was put to death by lethal injection at Stateville Correctional Center. He had fried perch, coleslaw, potato salad, canned peaches, and fruit juice for the last meal. His last words were, "Hello to everyone. May you all have peace because of this. May my victims' families have peace." A little over a year later, a second double execution took place in Illinois. Walter Stewart, November 19, 1997. He was found guilty of killing 2 individuals during a heist at a jewelry store. Walter's parents abandoned him when he was a baby. His abusive grandma and his mentally ill, delusional grandfather were left to raise him. Walter was influenced by his elder cousin, who helped him become addicted to drugs and lead a life of crime. Walter was under the influence of morphine, codeine, and Valium at the time of the crime. Linda Manzano owned a jewelry business in Berwyn, Illinois. She was in the store one Sunday in February 1980 with her brother, Danilo Rodica, her boyfriend, Thomas Pavlopoulos, a worker called Laura Lansinger, and Rodica's daughter, who was just 9 years old. At 1:30 p.m., Stewart, pretending to be a customer, initially went into the store, requested to see a variety of jewelry, and then departed. Between 4:30 and 5, he came back, pulled out a handgun, and declared he was robbing the store. He used his revolver to signal the 2 men and Linda Manzano, who were in front of him, to step aside after finishing the heist. Laura Lansinger and the kid were in the back room. When Linda Manzano took a step back, Stewart shot her in the abdomen, but the men remained still. With the help of the injured woman, the 2 men jumped Stewart to stop him from shooting, but they failed. Stewart pushed the woman to the ground and fired 4 rounds, striking both males. Stewart shot Rodica once more while his body twitched on the ground. The gun was empty, so he hurried to the rear room, aimed it at Linda Lansinger's face, and pulled the trigger, but all that was heard was a click. By the time Stewart left the store, the police had come and taken him into custody after Lansinger, who had concealed the child, had pressed the panic button. Stewart was pronounced dead at 12:30 a.m. In his final words, he said, "I love Jesus Christ, my Lord and Savior." He then took 2 deep breaths prior to being declared dead. No members of Stewart's family, nor family members of the victims, were present at the execution. The 42-year-old Stewart was offered a sedative, but he declined. He also declined a religious service, although he requested and received the Bible. There are no records of his final meal. Derlin Edmunds, November 19, 1997. Derlin Edmunds was sentenced to death in 1980 for the 1977 murder of 9-year-old African-American Richard Miller. Edmunds was diagnosed as schizophrenic in 1973 but received no treatment for his illness throughout a 3-month stay in hospital. Strong doubts were expressed regarding his competence to stand trial between 1977 and 1980, during which time he was diagnosed with schizophrenia on 6 occasions. Edmunds was 25 when he committed the crime. He called down to the alley beneath his flat early on October 27, 1977, and invited 9-year-old Richard Miller to come upstairs. When Richard got upstairs, Edmunds saw that the youngster was bleeding from his private parts. He had seen the boy with 2 men. He informed Richard that, like the other men, he wanted to have relations with him. Richard was instructed to undress by Edmunds. The previous essay had left Richard covered in filth and blood. Edmunds used toilet paper and a damp cloth to clean him. Richard was placed on a piece of plastic that Edmunds had prepared on the bed and started to sodomize him. The youngster began to cry and begged Edmunds to stop since he was causing him pain. The criminal slammed Richard's body face down into a pillow in an attempt to quiet him. He did not want the youngster to wake up his grandma in the bedroom next door. Richard stopped breathing. Edmunds saw that the boy's breathing was not right after he finished the act, and after attempting to resuscitate him, he searched for a location to hide the body. He disposed of the boy's clothes and the supplies he had used to clean him up in a yellow garbage bag and disposed of the body in a waste dumpster in the lane beneath his apartment. In a neighboring alley, he tossed the bag and its contents. On the day of his execution, Edmunds had no last words. 4 minutes after receiving a fatal injection, he gurgled and drew 2 gasping breaths. At 1:35 a.m., the coroner declared him dead. The execution was attended by 3 members of Edmunds's family. Edmunds, 45, received a sedative before being put to death. He watched television and called family in his last hours. There are no records of his final meal. Lloyd Wayne Hampton, January 21, 1998. At the hotel in Troy, where Roy Pendleton had lived since he was widowed, Lloyd Hampton knocked on his door. After asking to use the restroom, Hampton robbed Roy while brandishing a knife. Prior to his murder, Hampton tormented Roy by taping his lips, hands, and feet, hog-tied him with a dog collar, teased him with a chef's knife, burned his eyelid with a cigarette, sliced his forehead, and then stabbed him in the neck. According to the police, he was cool as a cucumber. No regrets. Hampton, a 7th grade dropout, had been incarcerated for the majority of his life and had only been released 4 years prior, in 1973. Prior convictions for robbery and assault with a deadly weapon were the result of Hampton's 1987 tormenting of a lady in Bakersfield, California. He claimed that he killed Roy in order to avoid being discovered. For his last meal, he only asked for a cigarette and a cup of coffee. Please hit that subscribe button if you like my channel. See you next time. Bye bye.